the recording again. So I had thought of, for the on arrival question, maybe one person could do the reflection for everyone to get kind of practice, but I forgot about that. So maybe we'll do that next time if we remember. Just so one person reflects everybody and just kind of gets the practice of doing it in the on arrival question. But so what I was thinking for today is we go right into our empathy circle. We have chapter 13, and we do about 40 minutes or so of discussion about chapter 13. And then the last part, we would talk about having the assignment of doing an empathy circle during the week, and then talk about just the thought about doing it, what our concerns are, whatever, our fears, our dreads, shaking your head. So we'll talk about it at that point and just have an empathy circle on that topic. So then let me share just a reminder. So I think I sent the wrong chapter number. I said 12. I think we're on 13, right?
Yes,
So,
yes. 13. Yeah.
So it's actually chapter 13, and it's the Art of Empathic Understanding, summaries, chapter 13. He starts off with empathic understanding in close relationships, and starts with a quote: "Most people see the problem of love primary is that of being loved rather than of loving, that of loving. If one's capacity to love, hence the problem to them is how to be loved, how to be lovable. In pursuit of this aim, they follow several paths." And I think there was more to it, but I didn't write that down. So the chapter talks about empathic listening is a foundation for friendships and intimate relationship. He explains sort of how to do an empathy circle. I mean, kind of basically, he doesn't use that term, but it's about empathic listening. He has a section on understanding versus problem solving. So he speaks to the difference between problem solving sort of as a block to empathy, maybe an understanding. And then about another heading, he has collaboration as mutual responsibility, and then the power of P's and D's, pleases and displeases, and for asking for change, so about making requests. So that was just a quick summary of the chapter. So we can go into our listening with 5-minute listening time for each person, and whoever would like to start can start, and you can talk about the chapter or whatever's alive in you if there's something else that's a burning issue. And so maybe I'll even start then. So Celia, would you?
Sure.
Okay. So in this chapter, it seems he's starting to talk about more the relational part of, how do we relate to each other. He has, a bit of an exercise, reach out, talking to others. And I see that the way, I think I mentioned this actually last time too, the way that we do it of starting with the relationship, I think is a better method than kind of this that he's doing. So. Yeah,
like even though he talks about relationship, he only talks about that now in chapter 13.
Yeah.
Right? Already straight away throw that in and grab the bull by the horns.
Yeah.
I don't know. That was interpretation.
Yeah, we just jump right into it. Start with the relationship part, and you get practice right away. And so I think this is more effective than, kind of waiting so long. And so, yeah, I feel good about kind of what we're doing.
That it really feels good to really practice straight away. And actually, by seeing this now only in chapter 13, it confirms for you that it feels better.
Yeah, and thanks. And then the other part was, he gives a lot of samples. And I just found the samples kind of hard to read, and the dialogue kind of hard to read. It was just, I see Peter shaking his head. It was just, somehow it was hard to kind of get into the chapter, it was kind of like boring reading those descriptions somehow.
Yeah. So
and I kind of struggled to get any real new insight. It was like there was nothing easily new insight that I really got. It was a little bit, let me just get through this kind of.
Right. There were no new nuggets actually that contributed to what you already know, and on top of that, it was like a boring chapter and hard to get through the samples that he gave or the examples.
Yeah, I feel my chest kind of constricting, my body kind of constricting as I was reading everything. There was nothing like, I think the only thing was, as you had mentioned it too, was the strategy of the last the try it is, he says try it, and I'm trying, and then how to present how you're going to try this with others. And he says, I'm trying to learn how to listen better, and I wonder if you'd be willing to help me practice. So that little box, that little quote, I thought, hey, that's a good way of sort of initiating something. That was the thing that stuck out for me the most. Yeah.
So from the whole chapter, that actually was the nugget in the end.
Yeah.
And you got it.
That was it. Yes. I feel heard. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Peter, would you want to listen to me?
I'm listening.
Let me see. Yeah, in the beginning, he says, it's best when both people in relation understand the quality of what listening involves, and learning and practicing together. We in our everywhere we are not taught that, or nowhere we are taught that. Maybe in church they may say, oh, you should, but they do not give you guidelines, or unless you do family counseling. And then again, it's mostly the counselor who tells you what to do. And what it reminds me of, like, how does learning actually occur? And how do we pick up on things, and how do we get curious? When is the moment that we want to learn more? And that maybe also tie in with my own question, how do I open that up with a new person, or with a person I hardly know? And I think the main thing is that you have to find out where they are at in their learning skills. How do you say, the scale? Like, is it something that they've never heard of?
Yeah.
So they're...
Can I reflect back what I'm hearing?
Yes. Oh.
Yeah. So you really enjoyed the author's talk about how to make the whole learning about empathy situation collaborative. Am I right?
I don't think I said that, but I said it when Edwin said it. I think. Doesn't matter. I was talking actually about that. He said it's best when all people in a relationship understand the qualities that involves this learning, but he does not say how to open that up.
Yeah.
So
you really enjoyed when all the people can appreciate what's actually happening and the quality of the learning in that moment.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And that made me think of what are the learning stages of humans. How do they learn? When do they get enthusiastic or curious? What is in the first place? Like you said, they have to have an issue before they want to start growing. There has to be an issue. Or so they run into something, and then is
it that you want it's almost like you're getting curious about how do I observe and like notice people's willingness to actually even participate in this,
right?
And how you use that,
right, and then already moving towards what we want to talk about later, giving this first sentence, but how's the start? And when when will a person say, oh, tell me more? How will that happen?
How do you capture that person's zest for actually participating and creating this knowledge together with you?
Yes, and being open to maybe practice with you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. For me, I'm just realizing that, you know, after a full day of work, reading this chapter was a slog. Like, it's like I'm just, it drained me. It really did. So I'm kind of.
Who are you speaking to?
Varsha. So
hi everyone. I didn't say hi before.
Hi, Varsha.
I'm just realizing that how much, like, you know, just the chapter I had to like reread it 3 times, because each time I would like just start scanning the page, you know, and that's not fun after a full day of work. You know, it just was one of those days of work. You know, I'm very content with how much work I did, but I did a lot of work. So I'm just kind of sitting with that. I'm kind of sitting with that kind of like, you know, drowsy energy of just, you know, I'm not, to be honest, I didn't find it interesting or, you know, entertaining. You know, I'm almost, I want to play off you guys, see what knowledge you guys got from it and see if I could pull something out, you know?
Also, let me reflect back. You had a very long day and you worked a lot, and that you also enjoyed today working so much. And after a tiring day, when you came back home and you started reading, it was like maybe it was not easy for you to read, or you were like lazy enough to read this boring chapter. You didn't enjoy reading this chapter, because probably what I think, what I can understand is probably your mentally you were saturated to read everything after a long day, and that's why you couldn't concentrate, and you were just trying to scan, which led you to read 3 times. But despite of reading 3 times, you were not happy and enthusiastic.
Yeah, you're right. It's also, I'm realizing that I'm oversaturated in a way, and to be honest, I don't think there was much real content in there. It's kind of, you know, but my understanding is that you can't practice empathy without some kind of relationship already, or in the effort of having a relationship. So it's difficult for me to say, you know, like, hey, try this with this person in your life. Like, that's just doesn't reflect what I have in my life, you know. You know, it's a baseline thing. I can go and to my mother and say, hey, I'm practicing this thing, listen to me, you know, or, you know, that's just what I'm used to. So like, I don't get where he's coming from this chapter.
So you did not find this chapter interesting because you did not find any relationship, like where to start. What I understand from your conversation is that it just starts randomly and you don't find connection or relationship. So you find it hard to relate with this chapter. And according to you, this is not how it works.
There's a quality that, you know, it's not much of a relationship if some of these base things aren't there already. Like, at least for me, I mean, so I'm okay with just this chapter not hitting for me, you know, just not being, not feeling right to me. I'm okay just sitting with that too, because I'm tired. So I think I'll just listen to everyone else. I'm feeling kind of complete.
Okay, so what I hear you is that you have accepted, like, it's okay if you don't get this chapter and you don't like this chapter. I also hear that you look for some common ground, a starting point to understand a specific chapter which you find missing, but you are okay with whatever your feelings are towards this chapter.
Yeah, I'm okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Celia.
Yeah.
Oh. I have to admit, like, when I decided to read this chapter at 5 o'clock, something came up So like every time I read this chapter 15 minutes before we start. So I'm kind of halfway through this chapter.
So you're just only halfway and not even read it totally, and it was prayed before our meeting started.
Yes, and reflecting back to Peter, what he was saying, like suddenly, like he mentioned that he randomly goes to his mother and he starts, you have to listen or whatever. And I have been finding it difficult to try with my husband because I've not been able to find a relationship to start the conversation. So yeah, so maybe I'm not able to engage him or something. So when we started this session, like at the beginning, I started trying with my husband, but it was very difficult for me to, do this practice with him. Maybe I realize now after listening to Peter that there is no common connection, and that's why we're not able to hold the conversation with my husband. Yeah.
Right. So even though you tried to engage your husband in a conversation with you about this, you realize that it may even be the chapter that doesn't give enough food for you to have succeeded to talk with your husband. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, not a chapter specifically, but maybe I didn't realize that I need to find some connection to strike a conversation, to have a common ground.
To have that with your husband, and to find something that both of you would want to share or talk about. Yeah.
Yes, although like while like studying this, like involving in empathy work for my personal thing, I realized that to have empathy, there has to be a common connection. If there's no common connection or if there's no intersection, then empathy cannot happen. And I'm just wondering, how did I miss that? Despite of knowing this reality or this fact, how did I even miss that? And, before even like starting conversation with my husband, it's like why I'm not able to find a common connection, to strike a conversation with my husband. So I think now it will stay in my radar to find a common.
So you feel there is actually no empathy possible if you don't have a common connection with something.
Yeah.
And even with your husband, even though you live with him, it's still not happening. And that would be actually the same with a stranger. Or where would empathy happen? How would it happen?
Yes. I mean, when I mentioned right now about the common connection, I was talking about like intentionally setting a separate time for empathic listening, How do I practice that empathic listening? Like to practice from this book, like, to practice the skill, How do I start? Although I started, it didn't last because probably I didn't use the right approach.
Okay, even though you started that with your husband, I understand, for a weekly setting up and to sit down together, and that he helps you with to going through that. It did not continue because you maybe realize you did not understand what the components were for it to have it succeed.
Yeah. Yeah, intentional.
Still wondering. And still wondering, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just like reflecting back to Peter, like Peter goes to his mother, you have to listen, I'm doing this practice. I cannot do that with my husband, It like, he doesn't have patience, like. So I have to like find out some indirect way, not telling him I'm practicing, but just find some strategy to start the conversation without him knowing it. I'm practicing with him.
Right, because that would block him.
Yes.
He would,
like finding a common connection, like, it's hard for me, like listening, okay, like,
Like you listening to him is hard too, or?
No, just for practicing sake, like for, if somebody comes and tell me, okay, I have to practice listening, it's not going to entertain me, or it's not going to hold me.
No, right, there's no juice in there.
Yes.
What's the fun of doing that? Right, okay, man.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. I feel heard.
Okay, thank you. Bill.
Yes.
Hi, let me see. Well, this chapter for me was also confusing because of, he mentioned some examples, and then I think, no, I think that's not the listening that we are after. Like he says, he gives example of a conversation, and one person says, yes, I couldn't wait for the day to be over. And then the other person says, you look excited, like there's something you were looking forward to. Well, that is not what the person said. And so I thought, why would he give that example? Because that is, yeah.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, that was not reflective. That's not even the reflective listening that we do. Yeah.
Okay. Your time was not up, by the way.
Right, that was Varsha's. I took yours, Varsha.
So you found it confusing, and you found that the particular examples were not exactly empathic listening or reflective listening as you've come to practice it or understand.
Right. And that also gives a confusing feeling of this chapter. Yeah.
Right. And from what I get is that in the particular, those are the two brothers who were having the conversation about the end of the day. And then, that one brother, he felt that was maybe reaching a little too far, making too many assumptions rather than reflecting.
Yeah, I think that's, But he did not point that out. William did not point that out. So, okay. And also, like, he gives the example in a discussion, and it looks like then that he would advise us to do that. That someone says, "Just listen, please." Well, I don't think that works. Just listen, please. It's only if you are already in a deeper conversation, and then again you would say, I wasn't finished yet, or I still want to say some more. Say it from you instead of you listen, and then even please behind it.
Okay, so you felt that also in the other example where someone is saying, just listen, please.
Yeah.
That was sort of an artificial kind of constraint on the conversation, and wouldn't be very effective, and would not be interpreted by the listener in the spirit that he's talking about.
Yeah, it would just block up. It's a roadblock. It's a you message.
Roadblock.
But on the other hand, he gave there some really nice topics to talk about, and I like those very much. An whole row of topics that I think, wow, we could use some of those. And but again, later he says, "Whoa, you must be exhausted." No, that's not what he said, but that's okay. Yeah. So and then he goes. I think the main thing is to, if you have something in your relationship, yes, it's very nice to go to the pleases and what doesn't please you, to make that list. But and it's a fun exercise. But I think there are several fun exercises that you could do with them, but he does not describe them, so he leaves them out. And I think that is just where the juice would be.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in your, you like the topics that he brings up, that some of the topics for a circle, those you found fruitful.
Yeah.
But you were, that he gave some example about the pleases and displeases, which I'm not quite sure I might be sensing, but it was a little bit too much of a cost-benefit analysis and a little bit too dry. Was that what you were feeling about it?
Yeah, that he, it's more like saying that you have to do that, but yeah, you can, yeah.
So you're saying that practice is more of a chore rather than juice you would get from like a relationship, a good relationship. There's a certain juice there.
Yes, and I thought for us to know, or for me to contribute to this creation of the MOOC, I thought, okay, don't let's forget juicy exercises with little gadgets or cards or with some fun things, you know, that you make it fun games. And I thought, so the good part of this is that I thought, okay, we should not forget that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in contrast to the kind of dry exercises that he gives, you are starting to think like, well, yes, but what's not said, the negative space contains lots of room for creativity and play and things like that to encourage people to do this and to have fun.
Well, especially for us to not forget that, to incorporate that in a training. If we offer something that is really major for people to be enticed by a fun a card game, like tell me about your whatever, you know, and then a nice picture. Yeah.
So you're finding that this inclusion of fun activities, you're really feeling that should be a core factor of our curriculum design as we go forward. Or
at least not to be forgotten. Thank you. I feel heard. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Welcome. Okay. Let's see. Edwin?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I agree with you. I was kind of like a difficult chapter to read with the kind of dialogue. Dialogue is hard to write, you know, and unless it's really done well, you know, you tend to delve into kind of flat Dick and Jane type of caricatures. So I certainly agreed with that. I saw this as a transition for him. What he was trying to do is to take empathic listening out of the practice and try to, and maybe clumsily, certainly I could see, but put that into real life. So in my own experience, that's what I'm trying to do, not formally, but informally. Not say, like I was having a dispute with my partner the other day, and as usual, the essence is that, like in the book, we were not giving each other enough information, you know, to evaluate what each other was saying. You know, we don't have to get into the specifics. But at the end, you know, I was just saying, and there was this impasse. I said, I guess I'm saying that I don't feel heard. You know, that's what I'm saying here, that I'm not being acknowledged. And that felt very good to say it. It kind of diffused the, you know, the dysfunctional back and forth. And we just kind of like calmed down, and then we actually were able to get out and supply each other with the information we needed to say, okay. And so I like that. And that's enough. I mean, why don't you, I'll pause there.
Okay, so you're having the same experience. You know, the chapter is a bit dry, especially the dialogue part. That's you know that's hard to write good and engaging dialogue. It's easy for it to be flat. So that was your experience, but you're saying that you could see that when you felt he was trying to shift from sort of more didactic learning to more how to apply this into your everyday life, and that you actually found it useful for your own life, or you're starting to have a little bit of an argument with your partner, and you know and then you were starting to use some of these tools and processes, applying it, and one of them was, you know, being able to say, hey, I don't feel heard. And, you know, you felt some satisfaction in being able to express that. And then after that, it was like you were able to give each other the information that you needed. It sounded like it sort of worked itself out from there. So it kind of contributed and was being applied to your, you know, everyday life.
Yeah. And then, you know, he did talk. I mean, he sort of contradicts himself, but it is, I think, an issue that we should address here and other is that how does the empathic listening practice exist within the larger context? Because at one point he goes against and he says, well, do you want advice here? You know, like a friend. He's saying, yeah, it's okay if that's what they want. Like sometimes they want to just be listened to. Sometimes they want some suggestions. And in the context, you know, what do you want from me as a friend here? Do you want advice or do you just want to be listened to? And I like that because I think that life is much more complex than any kind of system, however good. And then, and I just think that it's interesting we're talking about crossing that line. So I guess it's an interesting observation. That's why I don't have like a decision whether it's good or bad or something like that. And an interesting
Right. So you're seeing that he's talking about listening and giving advice, and that he was actually, someone was asking for advice and he was giving it, and you're just noticing that dynamic, that there's the listening and then there's also advice giving, and there's not any one system that works. You can do some advice, and then if somebody asks for listening, if somebody's, you do listening, and if someone asks for advice, then you give them advice. They're sort of like ready for it. And
yeah, and I would say that that's true, but I think that for this purpose is also, but really with an emphasis on trying to maintain the empathic listening environment. I mean, there might be times to go off, like we discussed, but it's like you can have that flexibility if you also have the structure.
Mm-hmm. There's sort of an underlying empathic presence that you can go off into other directions, but you still have that foundational empathic. You didn't use the word presence, but you're calling it a structure. But
thank you. I felt her.
Okay. I'll speak to Varsha.
Yes.
Hi, Varsha. Yeah, what is it? My mind feels a little bit blank. I was just focusing so much I didn't even have any thoughts come kind of in reserve here. So what is it about listening? Yeah. It's, I think, well, the thing about the advice is, I think about the advice that a couple aspects about that is, listening to someone really deeply, and then they feel ready for, asking for advice, and then you can they've kind of requested it, so that kind of makes it them more open and receptive to it. So it's kind of like that aspect about advice. I mean, there's kind of a time and place for it.
So what I hear, if I've understood what you are speaking, so you're talking about advice, and you like the way it's mentioned, like asking the front person if the person wants to receive the advice. So you kind of like that approach instead of directly advising without like unsolicited advice.
Yeah, unsolicited until the person is ready, And the other aspect of advice is, by listening, you hear you get to the deeper and deeper issues that really need to be addressed. So instead of giving advice for a superficial kind of topic, you eventually get down to something where it's really quite relevant. And how you make that distinction, how do you tap, it's a bit of an art, I think.
So you're talking about really listening deeper at a very deeper level, and then giving advice rather than giving advice at the superficial level. And it's kind of an art.
Yeah, and when I think of the chapters, it just feels kind of muddled. I don't have a real sense of clarity about it. It's like I think like Peter, I do appreciate everybody's, comments and kind of hearing the comments and playing off them. Like he does have a list of questions, topics. So I think that can help. It's like, I guess I'm trying to figure out like how can we use what we learned here to apply it to holding our own empathy circles and, applying it with our family or friends. So I'm kind of struggling there too. That might be a little confusing, but.
I'm sorry, I think I missed your beginning.
Yeah, I think what I said was a little confusing. I guess, yeah, I'm just trying to see what can I learn from this chapter to apply it to holding our own empathy circles. And I just find the chapter confusing. You know, if I would have to like read it several times maybe to really get out what it you know, something.
Mm-hmm. So you find this chapter confusing and you're struggling to probably have the insight from this chapter, and how can you use this chapter for your empathy circle?
Yeah, you know, yeah, that Celia and I were talking, you know, about creating a new sort of design for the training, and we're talking about the importance of felt experience. And if you have a sense of the felt experience to the whole curriculum, I think that can give a grounding. Like always coming back to the chapter is addressing a felt experience, and you're grounding in a felt experience. This seemed a little disjointed, intellectual, you know, and I think something where you're really grounding in felt experience might give people a better grounding. Would give me a better grounding, I think, but maybe I'm wrong.
So Celia, yourself and Celia were talking about creating a curriculum that's more focused on felt experience, and you find this book to be more intellectual. So I think you think designing a curriculum on felt experience might be more beneficial and more impactful rather than being intellectual.
Yeah, it's like the things, the P's and, what is it, the P's and Q.
What?
I'm just trying to see what he called it here. The
P's and D's. P and D, don't.
P and D's, yeah, like the P's and D's. What is the felt experience that the P and D represents? You know, so something, I don't know. It seemed to be it would need a whole redesign to make it, for me, more coherent. But maybe it's just that I didn't read it deeply enough. Okay, that's my time. Good, saved by the bell.
So in your opinion, P's and D's require more redesigning?
And grounding in feelings. Like, what's the feeling behind it?
Yes, grounding and feeling behind it.
Yep, I feel heard. Thank you.
Okay. I would like, Peter, would you like to hear me?
Of course.
My dabbling. Anyways. I kind of like these questions, topics that questions suggested that can be used in a close relationship, like to practice this reflective listening. I was looking for these kind of questions, but I think I need these kind of list of questions to make connection with a stranger. To make connections with a stranger, because you remember last time I was talking about finding it difficult to connect with strangers. So I think these kind of questions I would like in a more in a context of building a relationship with a stranger. It would be really helpful.
So you're experiencing that you're reading this, it's about relationships, like with someone you know, but it actually it's more of a activity you would do with someone that you're just meeting, just to practice.
Yes. Not just as a practice, but also to get to know the person, like at a deeper level, because I have been thinking about what questions to ask to a stranger, or even when I'm joining some course, or when I'm in a classroom setting or something, and I'm meeting people for the first time. I don't know how to what question should I ask other than what's your project, or what are you interested in? One artist talking to another artist, but that relationship doesn't go outside of that classroom, at a personal level. And another fear I have is, in my experience, what I've felt is people or maybe Americans don't really like to talk personally, or talk more personal things. So
when you're seeing, so when you're seeing this list of questions that, seem somewhat connective, it just makes you think about how you want to have that skill. You want to have that ability to connect with people when you meet them, either networking or in school or wherever.
Yeah.
And you're just kind of curious, like, how could I use these questions to help me? Is it even possible they could help me? You're kind of saying, like, is it just the American thing that they don't want to talk to me, or what's going on here? I want to connect with people.
Yeah. I'm like really struggling. And another thing, I have been like struggling with polite conversations, because in my experience, being polite is like, people don't want to be rude in telling the truth on your face, and want to be polite. And many a times I'm like, is this person talking genuinely, or is it like a person just trying to be polite?
Yeah.
And how to really know whether this is what the person is trying to say. Like, does he really mean what he says, or he's just like trying to...
So you're trying to have real authentic connections in these situations. You're really trying to connect with people, and you're just noticing, like, is this just some nicety? Is this just someone being polite and nice to me? And it's not going to go anywhere. And you want to kind of spend your energy where you want to spend it, not with these niceties and this politeness.
Yeah, because like even with my very close friends, sometimes like, your friends, like, this person will not be able to take in what I'll say, if it is blunt truth, or probably then you want to be diplomatic. So yeah, I've been like, I'm just kind of like just noticing different kinds of conversation, and how to really know the truth behind the spoken words. What is authenticity?
Yeah.
Sometimes I just interpret, or maybe sometimes sometimes I question myself, is it just the way I think, or should I really believe the front person?
Yeah, so you're really trying to find those authentic connections, and you're really looking, all this practice you're doing about empathy is really making you look and say, like, is it me? Is it the situation? Is it just the person? Mm-hmm. And you're just kind of being curious about, where does this all fit in with authentic communication and with empathy?
Yeah, I feel heard.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Bill.
Okay.
Again, the most juice I get out of the conversations tend to be like from the offshoots of what someone else is saying. And I'm realizing, even just what a gift it is to have a chapter not hit. I really felt good with Varsha, It's kind of like, it's fun to think like, wow. And I remember when I first started, doing a lot of empathy training, going for my master's degree and then my doctorate, that it was like all the onions started unpeeling. I started realizing things and going like, oh God, what is this? Oh, what is that? Oh God. And I kept going deeper and deeper. So it's kind of fun hearing someone else do it.
So you're kind of relishing the fact that the chapter didn't hit. It was because it stirred the pot and stirred a conversation, and you felt some real juice in listening to Varsha and what she was struggling with. And you were able to relate it back to earlier times as you were learning about empathy and going deeper and deeper in the struggles that you had.
Yeah. So I'm just kind of reveling right now in how even even a bad shot will still do something. Like, they have the saying, you miss every shot you don't take. Mm-hmm. He's Wayne Gretzky. So that's it, it's kind of making me think like, wow, even with this bad shot, we still get something out of it. What we expected.
Right. So you're enjoying, it seems to really be enjoying, and it's actually feels to me that you're getting energy from realizing that in the discussion of the chapter, there's value, even though the chapter itself may be somewhat disappointing.
Yeah. And, you know, just thinking about that, you know, it's making me reflect back on just the nature of my relationships, you know, and how, you know, how mindful am I of what the actual connection is, you know, of every relationship that I have. And just looking, you know, I don't have all the life experience that you guys have, but in that same way, I can tell, you know, how different my relationships are from 20 to 30, you know, and then I'm kind of thinking, oh, wow, it's going to be fun to see what happens at 40, 50, and 60, you know?
So you're considering, you know, it's making you reevaluate and look in a new way at the relationships that you have. And so you're seeing, and you're noticing that, you know, we have more life experience, but you've noticed that the changes in yourself from 20 to 30, and so are looking forward to further changes and further life experiences and further deepening of understanding.
Yeah. All right. I feel heard. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Celia?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think I'm just coming and, you know, certainly agreeing with the experiential part of the MOOC. And it's not quite clear, but in other words, taking off where I agree that the chapter may not be good, but if you have 5 intelligent, creative, motivated people talking about it, then good things come from it.
Right.
And this is the sort of, and this practice brings out that sort of energy in people. I can stop there.
Right. So even if this chapter was not the juicy one that we had hoped for, if you bring 5 people together who are all jumping on it and who are creative and maybe innovative, they can come up with something that transcends that and something better. Yeah, and it's helpful. Yeah. Any kind of material you put in front of us. Yeah.
Right, which is again, which goes to, and I think that Edwin said this and other people have said this, with the importance of an experiential part of the curriculum design.
So that is really important, that we design something that has an experiential feeling to it, that people really have experienced something when they do it. Yeah.
And then the other aspect to it, which I think which is illustrated in what we did here today, is that also we should honor the individuals that participate and that do this. In other words, we took, everybody here took a chapter and we all made it interesting for each other. And then that is a unique thing about this practice, because it's a form, but each one is unique and different because of the individual. And I think if we want to grow it, you know, and make it, like you say, lower that barrier to participation, that we really also inculcate an air of gratitude and appreciation for the people who participate.
Sure. So not to forget that all the people who participate make part of such a big experience that it requires gratitude, or it requests gratitude to honor them and to honor all the inputs that people do. Yeah. So that is something you would want us to add in the MOOC training?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. I feel heard.
Okay, great.
Okay, Celia, I was thinking we could move into just discussing about sort of the homework, or whatever you want to call it.
Okay.
And
then, sorry.
Oh, I would just present what the idea is, and then you could start with pick up.
Yeah.
Okay. Then let me share this. Oh, No, I'm gonna first